They laughed when they asked his rank, the kind of laugh that carried just enough disrespect to sting, but not enough to be openly punished. And he noticed it immediately, even though his face remained calm and unreadable. Years of discipline having trained his muscles to betray nothing. Because the instructors saw only an elderly man in a plain uniform with faded ribbons and assumed time had softened him the way it softened metal left too long in salt air. And the classroom had that familiar smell of polish and recycled air, the kind every naval facility shared, where authority usually flowed in one direction, and questions like that were never jokes. But today it was, or so they thought, as one instructor leaned casually against the desk and said, "So, old-timer, what was your rank back in the day?" While a few cadets exchanged smirks, expecting a harmless answer. Maybe petty officer, maybe lieutenant, something respectable but forgettable. And the man's eyes drifted briefly to the window where the flag moved slowly in the wind, reminding him of mornings long past when silence carried more weight than laughter. And he thought of ships cutting through black water, of orders whispered instead of shouted, of responsibility so heavy it pressed into his chest even now, but he did not rush to answer. Because power learned patience long before it learned command. And that pause unsettled the room more than any sharp rebuke could have, because silence, when worn correctly, was louder than arrogance, and finally he turned back. His voice steady and quiet, not rising to meet the joke, not lowering to accept it, and he said, "Fleet Admiral," and the word fell into the room like a dropped instrument on a steel deck. Sudden and impossible to ignore, and for a heartbeat nothing happened. Because disbelief often comes first, the mind scrambling to protect itself from embarrassment by rejecting reality. And one instructor let out a short, awkward chuckle, assuming sarcasm, until he noticed that no one else was laughing. Because something in the man's posture had changed, not visibly, but perceptibly. Like the moment before a storm when the air feels heavier. And the senior instructor's smile began to fade as he realized the joke had reversed direction. Now aimed squarely at them, and the room grew quiet in that way only military spaces can, where even breathing feels out of regulation. And the cadets sat straighter without knowing why, reacting to instinct rather than instruction. Because authority, when real, required no announcement. And the old man did not repeat himself or explain. He did not list commands or battles or decorations. Because he did not need to, and the instructors exchanged glances, unsure whether to challenge him or retreat. And it was that uncertainty that marked the shift of power. Because men who were used to command suddenly found themselves calculating consequences. And one of them cleared his throat and asked for clarification, attempting to regain control with procedure. "Sir, could you clarify?" And the man nodded once, slowly, as if granting permission rather than receiving it, and said, "Retired," and that single word carried more finality than any rank spoken loudly. Because retirement did not erase authority. It merely removed the need to exercise it, and now the laughter had fully evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that they might have misjudged the room. The man and themselves, and the cadets sensed it too. Eyes moving between the instructors and the guest, reading a lesson no syllabus had prepared them for. That respect was not demanded by volume or youth or confidence, but earned through weight, and the senior instructor finally straightened, instinctively adjusting his stance. His voice noticeably more formal as he asked about service years, deployments, commands, and the old man answered briefly, efficiently. Each response clipped and precise, revealing just enough to confirm truth without indulging curiosity. And as the minutes passed, the instructors realized that every attempt to steer the conversation back to their authority only emphasized how little of it they truly held in this moment. Because the man was not competing with them, he was simply present, and presence, when forged over decades of command, bent rooms quietly. And the cadets leaned forward now, not because they were told to, but because something rare was unfolding. A living example of the difference between rank worn and rank earned, and one cadet, younger than the rest and bold in the way only the inexperienced could be, raised a hand and asked what it was like to hold such responsibility. And the room held its breath, wondering if the man would deflect or dismiss. But instead he looked at the cadet directly and said, "It means you don't sleep," and a few nervous smiles appeared. But then he continued, "Because when you close your eyes, lives move without you, and you must trust what you built to hold." And that silenced the room again, because it stripped glamour from the title and revealed its cost, and the instructors felt it too. The weight behind the words pressing against their earlier mockery, now painfully out of place, and the senior instructor nodded slowly, respect replacing embarrassment, and said, "We appreciate your time, Admiral," emphasizing the title properly now, and the man inclined his head, not in gratitude but acknowledgement, and as the session ended, the cadets stood instinctively, no command given, chairs scraping softly as they rose, honoring something older than protocol. And the old man walked toward the door without ceremony, but before leaving, he turned back once, scanning the room with eyes that had seen far worse than awkward laughter, and said, "Never ask a question you aren't prepared to answer yourself." And then he was gone, leaving behind a silence that no one rushed to fill, because they understood that what had just happened was not humiliation, but instruction, delivered without cruelty. And long after the door closed, the instructors remained still, replaying the moment when a joke became a lesson, when assumed authority dissolved under the quiet gravity of true command. And each of them knew, without saying it aloud, that they would never again measure a man by how loudly he spoke or how young he looked, because they had just been reminded that the most powerful rank in the room often belonged to the one who did not need to announce it. They did not speak for several minutes after he left, because the room itself seemed to require time to reset, as if the walls had absorbed the moment and were unwilling to release it too quickly. And the senior instructor finally dismissed the cadets earlier than scheduled, citing a change in lesson plan, though everyone knew the lesson had already been delivered in a way no manual could replicate. And as the cadets filed out, their usual chatter muted. The instructors remained behind, exchanging glances heavy with unspoken realization, because authority once shaken did not immediately settle back into place. And one of the younger instructors broke the silence with an uneasy laugh, attempting to diffuse the tension. But it fell flat, echoing the earlier mistake, and the senior instructor shot him a look that ended the sound instantly, because humor had lost its footing in that space. And instead there was reflection, sharp and uncomfortable. And the senior instructor sat down slowly, rubbing his temples, replaying the first laugh, the careless tone, the assumption that age equaled irrelevance. And he knew better, had always known better in theory. But theory was a poor shield against habit. And habits, once exposed, were humiliating to confront. And somewhere down the hall, the old man's footsteps faded. MEAZURED and unhurried, carrying him toward a meeting he had not requested, but one that would now unfold very differently than planned, because news traveled fast in military spaces, faster than gossip in civilian ones. And by the time he reached the administrative wing, his name had already begun to surface in hushed corrections and sudden posture adjustments, and a junior officer at the desk looked up, glanced at the visitor log, then looked again, eyes widening slightly as recognition clicked. And he stood so abruptly his chair skidded back, offering a salute that was sharp but nervous. And the old man returned it casually, almost lazily, not out of disrespect but familiarity, because salutes had long ago stopped meaning flattery and started meaning acknowledgement. And he signed in with steady handwriting that betrayed none of his years. And as he waited, his thoughts drifted not to the classroom but further back, to his first command, when he himself had mistaken volume for leadership, had thought certainty meant inflexibility, and had learned otherwise the hard way, through mistakes measured in lives and steel. And those lessons had etched themselves into him deeper than rank insignia ever could. And the door to the briefing room opened, revealing a group of officers mid-conversation, their words trailing off as they noticed him. Recognition passing through the room like an electrical current. And one by one they stood, conversation replaced by formal greetings. And for a brief moment, the old man saw himself reflected in their eyes, not as an elderly guest, but as an embodiment of something larger. Institutional memory given form. And he acknowledged them with a nod, taking a seat without. Teacher, and perhaps that night would be the first time they questioned their assumptions. The first time they realized that not every threat looks threatening, and not every strong person looks strong and far away from them. In a small apartment filled with quiet and simplicity, the old man finally stopped, unlocking his door and stepping inside, closing it gently behind him as if sealing away the outside world. And he leaned against the door for a moment, not exhausted, but thoughtful, letting the tension fully leave his body. And as he moved through the familiar space, the calmness of routine settled him further, because routine was another anchor, another way to stay grounded. And while he prepared a simple meal, his hands moved with practiced efficiency, the same hands that had once handled far more dangerous tools with precision and care. And as he sat down, he allowed himself to reflect deeper, not on the fight, but on the journey that led him there, the years of training that stripped away ego and replaced it with responsibility, the mentors who taught him that true strength was restraint, that the goal was always to return home, not to prove anything. And those lessons had stayed with him long after the uniform was gone, shaping how he lived, how he interacted with the world, how he responded to conflict. And that was why, even when attacked, he had not felt rage, only clarity, only the need to end the situation without unnecessary harm. Because harm left scars on both sides. And he had enough scars already, visible and invisible. And as the night deepened, he sat quietly, listening to the hum of the building, the distant sounds of life continuing uninterrupted. And he realized how fragile peace really was, how easily it could be disrupted by ignorance, fear, or cruelty, and yet how resilient it could be when met with wisdom and restraint. And that realization reaffirmed something he had long believed, that the world did not need more displays of power, but more examples of control, more reminders that strength could be quiet, measured, and responsible. And somewhere across the city, the young men lay awake, replaying the encounter over and over, their confidence shaken, their assumptions challenged. And though none of them would admit it out loud, a seed had been planted, a realization that there were depths to people they had never considered. And perhaps, just perhaps, that realization would guide their choices in the future, steering them away from reckless cruelty and towards something better. And as the old man finally lay down to rest, sleep came slowly but peacefully, not haunted by regret or anger, but accompanied by acceptance, because he understood that his past would always be a part of him, not as a burden, but as a foundation, something that allowed him to navigate an unpredictable world with calm and purpose. And even as time continued to take its toll, slowing his body but sharpening his perspective, he knew one thing with certainty, that he would never need recognition to validate his worth, never need to prove himself to strangers, because his value had already been tested in the harshest conditions imaginable, and survived. And that quiet truth, carried within him, was stronger than any insult, any threat, or any challenge that might come his way. Morning arrived quietly, filtering through the thin curtains and resting gently on the walls of his apartment. And as his eyes opened, the old man did what he had always done first. He listened, not out of paranoia but habit, noting the steady hum of the building, the distant voices outside, the rhythm of a city waking up. And only after confirming that everything was as it should be, did he rise from the bed. Moving carefully yet confidently, his joints reminding him of time's passage, but his balance still steady. And as he went about his morning routine, he reflected on how life had slowed in ways he once feared, but now appreciated. Because slowing down allowed space to think, to observe, to understand. And understanding was something he valued far more than speed. And while making his coffee, the smell triggering memories of countless early mornings before missions. Before long days defined by uncertainty, he smiled faintly at the contrast. Because back then mornings were about preparation for chaos, while now they were about appreciating calm. And as he stepped outside later that day, merging once again into the flow of ordinary people, he felt no tension from the night before, no lingering urge to replay the encounter. Because he had learned long ago that dwelling on conflict gave it power it did not deserve, and instead he focused on the present. The warmth of the sun, the sound of conversation, the simple fact that life continued. And as he walked, he passed people of all ages, all appearances, each carrying their own unseen histories. And he wondered how many of them had been underestimated at some point, how many had been judged by surface alone, and how many had quietly endured things that would break others. And that thought reinforced a belief he held deeply, that respect should never be conditional, never based on appearance or age, because the strongest stories were often carried silently and across town. The young men from the night before moved through their own mourning, bruises hidden beneath clothes, confidence shaken beneath forced laughter. And though they did not speak of it openly, the encounter weighed on them, changing the way they looked at others, the way they assessed situations, because for the first time they had been confronted with the reality that the world was not as simple as they thought. That danger did not always come dressed in aggression, and that underestimating someone could carry consequences. And one of them, quieter than the rest, replayed the old man's calm voice in his head, the warning that had been given without threat. And he realized that was what frightened him the most. Not the physical outcome, but the certainty behind those words. And as the day unfolded, choices were made differently. Routes changed, impulses questioned, and though none of them would label it growth, something had shifted, and back in his part of the city, the old man stopped at a small park, sitting on a bench and watching children play, their laughter light and unburdened. And he felt a sense of gratitude that the world still held innocence despite its flaws, that not everything was shaped by conflict. And as he watched parents keep a protective eye, he thought about responsibility, about how strength was often expressed not in dominance but in protection, in choosing to de-escalate rather than inflame. And those thoughts aligned with the values he had carried since his service days, values that had been tested under extreme pressure and proven their worth. And while sitting there, a passerby nodded at him politely, a simple gesture of acknowledgement, and he returned it, understanding how small acts of respect could ripple outward in ways unseen. And as afternoon turned to evening, he rose and continued on his way, once again blending into the city's rhythm, unseen yet fully present. And he realized that this was the life he had earned, not one of glory or recognition, but one of quiet purpose, of lessons learned and applied without needing validation. And though his past would always be a part of him, it no longer defined him entirely. It simply informed his choices, guided his reactions, and anchored his sense of self. And somewhere within that understanding was a deeper truth. That true power was not about proving anything to others, but about knowing yourself so completely that no insult, no challenge, no misunderstanding could shake you. And as night settled once more, lights flickering out across buildings, the city resumed its familiar glow. And the old man walked on, steady and composed, carrying within him a lifetime of experience, discipline, and restraint. A reminder that strength does not fade with age. It simply changes form, becoming quieter, wiser, and far more dangerous to underestimate. And for anyone who might cross his path in the future with the same careless arrogance, the lesson would be the same, that mocking what you do not understand is the fastest way to learn humility. And that some people, no matter how ordinary they appear, carry storms within them that should never be provoked, not because they seek conflict, but because they have mastered it and choose peace instead.